The great machine had been dying for 11 years. Talva stood before it every morning, just as he had done for over a decade. The quantum harmonizer rose from the floor of Velen Station like a frozen waterfall made of crystal and light. It was beautiful. It was ancient. And it was broken in a way that no one could fix. Talva's was not just anyone. He was the chief engineer of the Neth Collective, a species known across 6 star systems for their brilliant minds. The Neth lived for hundreds of years. They thought slowly and carefully. They never rushed. They believed that patience and deep thinking could solve any problem in the universe. For 300 years, Talvas had studied machines like this one. He had written 72 papers about quantum energy. Other species called him a genius. Young Neth engineers traveled across the galaxy just to hear him speak. But the harmonizer did not care about his reputation. Every day, the machine grew a little weaker. Every day, the energy readings dropped a little more. The harmonizer was the heart of Velen Station. It kept the dimensional rift stable. That rift powered half the sector. Millions of beings on dozens of worlds depended on it for heat, light, and life itself. If the harmonizer failed completely, the rift would collapse. The station would be destroyed. The entire sector would go dark. Talvas had tried everything. He had rebuilt the focusing arrays. He had replaced the crystal matrices. He had written new equations and tested new theories. He had meditated for weeks at a time, searching his mind for answers. Nothing worked. His people did not blame him. That was not the Neth way. They simply trusted that he would find the solution eventually. But Talvas could see the truth in their eyes. They were afraid. Time was running out. The harmonizer would fail completely within 1 lunar cycle, 1 month. That was all the time they had left. On the day everything changed, Talvas was alone in the harmonizer chamber. He stood surrounded by floating screens that showed equations and energy patterns. His forearms hung at his sides. His gray skin looked pale and tired. He had not slept properly in years. The chamber was quiet except for the soft hum of the machine. That hum had once been strong and steady. Now it wavered and stuttered like a weak heartbeat. Talvas closed his large black eyes and listened. He had listened to this machine for so long that he knew every sound it made. The hum, the pulse, the soft whisper of energy flowing through crystal. He did not hear the door open behind him. The human ship had arrived at Velen Station that morning. It was called the Lucky Guess, a small trading vessel with a crew of 7. They were just passing through, looking to resupply before continuing their journey across the sector. The Neth did not usually welcome outsiders, but they had no reason to turn away simple traders. The humans were given permission to dock and stretch their legs while their ship was refueled. Yuna was the ship's technician. She was 26 years old, with dark hair that she kept tied back in a messy ponytail. She wore a brown jacket covered in old stains and patches. Her hands were rough from years of work. She had been fixing broken machines since she was 8 years old. Yuna had no fancy degrees. She had never been to an engineering school. Everything she knew, she had learned by doing. By breaking things. By making mistakes. By figuring out how to put things back together when they fell apart. She was wandering through the station, looking for a bathroom when she got lost. The Neth corridors all looked the same to her. Smooth walls. Soft blue light. No signs that she could read. She turned a corner and found herself in the harmonizer chamber. The machine took her breath away. She had never seen anything so big or so beautiful. It looked like something out of a dream. Light moved through the crystal like living water. The whole thing seemed to glow from within. Then she noticed the alien standing in front of it. He was tall and thin with gray skin and 4 arms. His back was turned to her. He seemed very sad and very tired. Yuna knew she should probably leave. This was clearly an important place, and she was clearly not supposed to be here. But something caught her attention. A sound. Click, click, click. It was soft. Almost too soft to hear. But Yuna had spent her whole life listening to machines. She knew the sound of something wrong. She tilted her head and listened more carefully. There it was again. A small clicking sound, happening every few seconds. It was coming from somewhere near the bottom of the big machine. "What's that sound?" she asked. Talvas turned around slowly. He looked at the human with confusion. She was so small, so young, so out of place in this sacred chamber. "What sound?" he asked. "That clicking. Every few seconds. You don't hear it?" Talvas listened. He heard only the hum of the harmonizer, the pulse of energy, the sounds he had heard 1,000,000 times before. "I hear nothing unusual," he said. "The sounds you hear are simply quantum decoherence echoes. They are a symptom of the instability we have been studying for many years. They are not important." Yuna frowned. She walked closer to the machine, ducking under the warning barriers without thinking. "No," she said. "Not that sound. The other one. The mechanical one. Listen." She pointed at the base of the harmonizer. There was a large metal panel there, bolted to the floor. It looked solid and permanent. Click, click, click. "There," Yuna said. "That panel. It's loose." Talvas stared at her. Then he stared at the panel. That panel had been installed when the harmonizer was first built, over 500 years ago. It had never been opened. It had never been examined. It was not a variable in any of his equations. "That is impossible," he said. But even as he spoke, he heard it. A tiny click. So small. So easy to miss. He had heard it 1,000,000 times and never noticed. It was just part of the background noise. Part of the machine. Yuna was already on her knees, pulling a tool from her belt. "What are you doing?" Talvas asked, alarmed. "Checking," she said simply. And before he could stop her, she popped the panel free. Talvas felt his heart stop. In all his 300 years of study, no one had ever touched that panel. It was part of the original construction. It was sealed. It was sacred. And now this strange human woman was pulling it off with a simple hand tool like it was nothing. "Stop!" he shouted, reaching out with all 4 of his arms. But Yuna was fast. The panel came free with a soft pop, and she set it aside on the floor. She leaned forward and looked inside the opening. "Huh," she said. Talvas rushed over. His long legs carried him across the chamber in 3 quick steps. He looked down at the human, then looked into the opening she had created. Inside, there was a mess of cables and connectors. They were old, but still functional. Power flowed through them, carrying energy from the harmonizer's core to the rest of the station. This was basic infrastructure. Simple stuff. Nothing that should matter to the complex quantum problems he had been studying. But one connector was wrong. It was not broken. It was not damaged. It was simply loose. The metal contact had slowly, over hundreds of years, vibrated free from its socket. It was still touching, still making contact, but just barely. Yuna reached inside. "Do not touch that," Talvas said. "You do not understand what you are doing. It's just a loose connector," Yuna said calmly. She pulled a bit of wire from her pocket. It was an old piece, something she had saved from a previous repair job. She stripped the end with her teeth and twisted it around the loose contact, creating a secondary connection to hold everything in place. Then she snapped the panel back onto the wall. The clicking stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Talvas stood frozen, staring at the panel. The human stood up and brushed dust off her knees. She did not seem to understand what she had just done. Then the alarms went off. Not warning alarms. Not danger signals. These were different. These were the alarms that meant something good was happening. Something unexpected. Talva spun around to look at his floating screens. The numbers were changing. The energy readings were climbing. The decay that had been slowly killing the harmonizer for 11 years had stopped, not slowed. Stopped. The machine was stable for the first time in over a decade. Talvas could not speak. He could not move. He just stood there, watching the numbers climb higher and higher. The harmonizer was not just stable. It was getting stronger. It was healing itself now that the energy flow was no longer being disrupted. So, Una said behind him, "Where's the bathroom?" Talvas turned to look at her. This small, young, uneducated human. She had grease on her face. Her clothes were worn and patched. She had no idea what the harmonizer was or how it worked. She had never studied quantum mechanics. She had never written a single equation, and she had just to solve the problem that the greatest minds in 6 star systems could not fix. How? He whispered. How what? How did you know? How did you find the problem? Una shrugged. I heard it clicking. Loose things click. So I tightened it. It's not complicated. But we have sensors, Talva said. His voice was shaking. We have monitoring systems. We have detection arrays that can measure energy fluctuations at the quantum level. None of them found this. Yeah, well, sensors are great, but they can't replace ears. Una tapped the side of her head. Machines make sounds. When they're healthy, they sound one way. When they're sick, they sound different. You just have to listen. Talvas looked back at the panel. 500 years. That connector had been slowly loosening for 500 years. So slowly that no sensor flagged it as a change. So gradually that it became part of the normal background noise. The vibration was always there, so the systems learned to ignore it. But Una had never heard the machine before. She had no idea what it was supposed to sound like. So when she heard the clicking, she noticed it immediately. You should put a lock washer on that, Una said, pointing at the panel. Prevents vibration loosening. Otherwise it'll just work itself free again in another few hundred years. A lock washer, Talvas repeated. He did not know what that was. Yeah, it's like a little metal ring with teeth. You put it under the bolt. The teeth dig in and keep everything tight. Basic stuff. Humans have been using them for thousands of years. Basic stuff. The words echoed in Talvas's mind. The greatest crisis his species had ever faced. The problem that had consumed his life for over a decade. Solved by basic stuff. I need to inform the council, he said quietly. Sure, Una said. But seriously, bathroom? I've been holding it for like an hour. Talvas pointed down the corridor with one of his arms. Third door on the left. Thanks. She walked away, her boots making soft sounds on the smooth floor. She did not look back at the harmonizer. She did not seem to care about what she had just accomplished. To her, it was just another repair. Just another loose connector. Just another day. Talvas stood alone in the chamber, surrounded by screens that showed impossible numbers. The harmonizer hummed behind him, strong and steady for the first time in years. He had devoted his entire life to this machine. He had studied it, analyzed it, meditated on it. He had written equations that filled entire books. He had given presentations that lasted for days, and he had missed the clicking sound. He had missed it because he was too busy looking for something complicated, something elegant, something worthy of his intelligence and training. He never thought to check the simple things, the basic things, the obvious things. A human child had walked in off the street and fixed his life's work in 30 seconds. Talvas did not know whether to laugh or cry. So he did neither. He simply stood there, listening to the hum of the machine, and tried to understand what had just happened. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. The news spread through Velen Station like fire. Within an hour, everyone knew. The harmonizer was fixed. The crisis was over. The station was saved. And it had been done by a human. The Neth Council gathered in the Great Chamber. This was a vast room shaped like a bowl, with seats rising up on all sides. Blue light filled the space. Hundreds of the collective's most important members sat in silence, waiting. Talva stood at the center alone. He had never felt so small. These were the greatest minds of his species, scientists, philosophers, leaders, who had guided the collective for thousands of years. They had trusted him to solve the harmonizer problem. They had given him all the time and resources he needed, and he had failed. Elder Pavith spoke first. She was ancient, even by Neth standards. Her gray skin had faded to almost white. Her forearms were thin and weak, but her mind was still sharp, and her voice carried across the chamber like a bell. "Tell us what happened," she said. "Tell us everything." Talvas told them. He described the human ship arriving at the station. He described the young woman wandering into the harmonizer chamber. He described the clicking sound that she had heard. He described the loose connector that she had found, and he described how she had fixed it, with a piece of wire and her bare hands. When he finished, the chamber was silent. No one spoke. No one moved. The council members just sat there, trying to understand what they had heard. Finally, Elder Pavith leaned forward. "A loose connector," she said slowly. "Our greatest crisis. Our most desperate hour. And it was caused by a loose connector." "Yes, Elder. A connector that was installed 500 years ago. A connector that slowly vibrated free over centuries. A connector that none of our sensors detected." "Yes, Elder. And a human fixed it. A human with no training, no education, no understanding of our technology." Talvas lowered his head. "Yes, Elder." The chamber erupted. Voices rose from every direction. Some were angry. Some were confused. Some were ashamed. The Neth had built their entire civilization on the belief that careful thought and patient analysis could solve any problem. They had looked down on other species who acted quickly and made mistakes. Now, they had been humbled by the very species they considered the most reckless and impulsive in the galaxy. "This is impossible," someone shouted. "The human must have been lucky. This cannot be skill." "She heard a sound that our sensors missed," another voice said. "How is that possible? Our technology is superior in every way." "Perhaps our technology is the problem," a third voice suggested. "Perhaps we have become too dependent on our machines." Elder Pavith raised one of her arms, and the chamber fell silent. "Talvas," she said calmly, "you are our greatest engineer. You have studied the harmonizer for longer than most of us have been alive. How did you miss this?" Talvas thought carefully before answering. The question was not an accusation. It was a genuine request for understanding. The Neth did not blame each other for failure. They only sought to learn. "I was looking for a complex answer," he said finally. "The problem seemed complex, so I assumed the solution must be complex as well. I built models and wrote equations. I searched for quantum fluctuations and dimensional instabilities. I never thought to check if something was simply loose. Why not? Because it seemed too simple. Too obvious, too. Beneath me." The words hung in the air. Talvas felt the weight of them pressing down on his shoulders. He had let his pride blind him. He had assumed that a great mind could only solve great problems in great ways. But the universe did not care about greatness. The universe only cared about what worked. "The human woman," Elder Pavith said. "What is her name?" "Yuna. She is a technician on a trading ship." "She has no formal training?" None. She learned by working with machines her entire life. By making mistakes and fixing them. Interesting. Pavith sat back in her seat. Her dark eyes were thoughtful. Bring her before the council. I wish to speak with her. Talvas nodded and left the chamber. He found Yuna in the station's common area, eating a bowl of noodles with her captain. The captain was a weathered man named Dohwan. He had gray hair and deep lines on his face. He looked uncomfortable surrounded by so many aliens. The council wants to see you, Talvas said to Yuna. She looked up from her noodles. Me? Why? They want to understand how you fixed the harmonizer. Yuna exchanged a look with her captain. Dohwan shrugged. Might as well, he said. Not like we have anywhere else to be. They followed Talvas back to the great chamber. When they entered, every eye turned to look at them. Yuna seemed unimpressed. She had seen a lot of strange things in her travels. A room full of four-armed aliens was just another day. You are Yuna? Elder Pavith asked. That's me. You fixed our harmonizer. I tightened the loose connector. It wasn't a big deal. A murmur went through the chamber. This human did not seem to understand the significance of what she had done. She spoke as if she had just fixed a leaky faucet, not saved millions of lives. It was a very big deal to us, Pavith said. We've been trying to solve this problem for 11 years. Our greatest minds could not find the answer. How did you? Yuna thought about it for a moment. I just listened, she said. The machine was making a weird sound. So I found out where the sound was coming from and fixed it. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. But our sensors detected nothing wrong. Yeah, your sensors were probably looking for the wrong thing. They were looking for energy problems or quantum stuff or whatever. They weren't looking for a panel that was rattling. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Pavith nodded slowly. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, she repeated. This is not a concept we are familiar with. Yuna shrugged. It's pretty common where I come from. Humans break stuff all the time. We're really good at recognizing when something's wrong because we've been wrong so many times ourselves. Captain Dohwan stepped forward. If I may, Elder, humans aren't smarter than other species. We're just different. We learn by failing. We make mistakes constantly, but that means we get a lot of practice fixing our mistakes. We notice things that others might miss because we've made those same mistakes before. The council listened in silence. This was a new way of thinking for them. The Neth avoided mistakes. They planned everything carefully. They never acted until they were certain of success. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe certainty had become a prison. Thank you, Pavith said finally. You have given us much to consider. The council meeting lasted for many hours after Yuna and her captain left. The Neth were not quick to change. They discussed and debated and analyzed everything the human had said. Some members refused to accept what had happened. They argued that it was just luck, a random accident, nothing that could be learned from or repeated. But most of the council saw the truth. They had been outperformed, not because the human was smarter, but because she was different. She thought in ways they did not. She noticed things they could not. She approached problems from a direction they had never considered. Elder Pavith called for a vote. The question was simple. Should the Neth change their ways? The vote was not even close. For the first time in centuries, the collective agreed to adopt new practices. They would start teaching their engineers to listen, not just measure. They would encourage young Neth to make small mistakes and learn from them. They would stop assuming that every problem required a complicated solution. It was a revolution, happening quietly in a blue-lit chamber. While a human woman ate noodles in the common area, Talvas was given a new assignment. He would study human engineering methods. He would learn their techniques. He would find ways to combine Neth patience with human practicality. He accepted the task gladly. His pride had been broken, but something new was growing in its place. Curiosity, humility, a willingness to learn. The next morning, he found Yuna in the docking bay. She was working on her ship, lying on her back under a power coupling. Her legs stuck out from beneath the machinery. Strange music played from a small speaker nearby. "Yuna," Talva said. She slid out from under the coupling. Her face was covered in grease. "Oh, hey. What's up?" "I wanted to thank you. And to ask you some questions, if you have time." Yuna sat up and wiped her hands on a rag. "Sure. I've got a few minutes before the captain wants to leave." Talva sat down on a cargo container. It felt strange to be at the same level as a human. Usually, he towered over other species. But sitting here, in this dirty docking bay, he felt like a student. "How did you learn to fix machines?" he asked. "My mom taught me," Yuna said. She was a technician, too, on a colony ship. When I was little, I used to follow her around and watch her work. She'd let me hold her tools and hand her parts. Eventually, she started letting me do small repairs myself. "Did you make mistakes?" Yuna laughed. "All the time. I broke more things than I fixed at first. My mom used to say I had a gift for making things worse before making them better. That sounds frustrating." It was, but it was also how I learned. Every time I broke something, I had to figure out why. And then I had to fix the thing I broke, plus the original problem. After a while, I started recognizing patterns. The same things break the same way for the same reasons. Talvas leaned forward. "Can you give me an example?" "Sure. Take power couplings." She pointed at the machinery she had been working on. They always fail in one of three ways. Either the connector gets loose from vibration, the insulation melts from overheating, or the contacts corrode from moisture. That's it. 3 things. Once you know that, you can diagnose almost any coupling problem just by looking and listening. But how did you learn those 3 things? By breaking a lot of power couplings. Yuna grinned. I must have fried like 20 of them before I figured it out. My mom was not happy. Talvas tried to imagine a Neth engineer breaking 20 power couplings. It would never happen. A Neth would study the coupling for years before touching it. They would build models and run simulations. They would never risk failure. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe failure was not something to be avoided. Maybe it was something to be embraced. "Can I ask you something?" Yuna said. "Of course. You guys are really smart, right? Like, way smarter than humans in most ways." "Our minds are more suited to certain types of thinking," Talvas said carefully. "We excel at mathematics, logic, and long-term planning. So why couldn't you fix the harmonizer?" Talvas sighed. He had been asking himself the same question for days. "Because we were too smart," he said finally. "We assumed the problem was complicated because the machine was complicated. We looked for elegant solutions because we believed in elegance. We never stopped to ask the simple questions, like whether something was just loose." "Yes, exactly like that." Yuna nodded. "I get it. It's like when my friend Minho got his first fancy cooking kit. He started making all these complicated dishes with weird ingredients. But his food actually got worse because he forgot the basics. Sometimes you just need salt and heat." "Salt and heat," Talvas repeated. "Yeah, the simple stuff. The stuff everyone overlooks because it's boring." Captain Dowan appeared at the entrance to the docking bay. "Yuna, we're leaving in 10 minutes. Finish up." Yuna stood and grabbed her tools. "I guess that's my cue." Talvas stood as well. "Before you go, I have one more question." "Shoot." "Would you consider staying?" "The council has authorized me to offer you a position at Velen Station. You would be well paid, well respected. You could help us build a new approach to engineering." Yuna looked around the docking bay. Then she looked at her ship, old and battered but familiar. Then she looked back at Talvas. "That's really nice of you," she said. "But I can't. May I ask why?" "Because I go crazy here. You guys sit still for hundreds of years. You think about things forever before you do them. That's not me. I need to move. I need problems to find. I need things to break and fix and break again." She smiled and held out her hand. Talvas had learned that this was a human greeting. He reached out with one of his arms and took her hand carefully. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." "No problem. And hey, remember what I said about the lockwasher. Otherwise you'll be doing this again in a few hundred years." "I will remember." Yuna grabbed her toolbox and headed toward her ship. She was whistling the strange music from her speaker. She did not look back. Talvas watched her go. He knew he would probably never see her again. The galaxy was vast, and humans were always moving. But he would not forget her. He could not forget her. She had changed everything. The lucky guest pulled away from Velen's station with a rumble and a flash of light. Yuna sat in the common room, her feet up on the table, watching the station grow smaller through the window. It was beautiful from the outside. A great spinning wheel of silver and blue, floating in the darkness of space. Hard to believe that something so huge had almost been destroyed by a loose connector. Captain Dohan sat down across from her with 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Yuna and kept the other for himself. "So," he said, "you saved the space station today." I tightened the bolt. "Same thing, apparently." Yuna smiled and took a sip of her tea. It was too hot, but she didn't mind. "They offered me a job, you know." "I heard. Are you having second thoughts?" "No, maybe. I don't know." She looked out the window at the shrinking station. It would have been nice. Steady work. Good pay. Respect. But I would have been so bored. Those people think for centuries before they do anything. I would have lost my mind after a week. Doan laughed. It was a rough sound, like gravel in a bucket. "That's fair. You've never been good at sitting still. Remember when I was 15 and I rewired the entire engine room because I was bored during that 3-month trip to the outer colonies?" "I remember. I also remember you almost blew us all up, but I didn't. And the engines ran 20% more efficient afterward." "True." Doan took a drink of his tea. "You're a good engineer, Yuna. One of the best I'd ever seen. It doesn't matter that you don't have fancy degrees or training. You understand machines in a way that most people never will." Yuna felt her face grow warm. Dohan was not the kind of man who gave compliments easily. When he said something nice, he meant it. "Thanks, Captain." "Don't thank me. Thank your mother. She's the one who taught you." Yuna's smile faded a little. Her mother had died 3 years ago. A reactor accident on a mining station. Quick and painless, they said. But that didn't make it hurt any less. "She would have liked this," Yuna said quietly. "Fixing an alien machine that no one else could fix. She always said that the best problems were the ones everyone else gave up on. She was right." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars drift by outside the window. The ship hummed around them, all its systems working properly. Yuna had made sure of that. She always did. Back on Velen's station, Talvas stood in the harmonizer chamber. The machine was singing. Not literally, but that was how it felt. The hum was strong and steady, like it had been centuries ago when the harmonizer was first built. The energy readings were perfect. The dimensional rift was stable. For the first time in 11 years, Talvas felt at peace, but he was not the same person he had been before. The experience had changed him. He looked at the world differently now. He listened more carefully. He questioned his assumptions. He remembered that sometimes the simplest answer was the right one. Elder Pavith appeared beside him. She moved quietly for someone so old. "It is beautiful," she said, looking up at the harmonizer. "It is. Do you regret anything?" Talvis thought about the question. Did he regret the 11 years he had spent failing to solve the problem? Did he regret his pride and his blindness? Did he regret needing a human to show him the truth? "No," he said finally. "I learned more from this failure than I learned from 100 successes. I would not trade that lesson for anything." Pavith nodded slowly. "Good. That is the right answer." She reached into her robe and pulled out a small metal object. It was circular, with teeth around the edges. A lock washer. Someone had fabricated it based on the human's description. "I thought you might want to install this yourself," she said. Talvis took the washer carefully. It was so small, so simple, but it represented something much larger. "I will," he said. Pavith turned to leave, then stopped. "The council has made a decision. From now on, every century, we will invite a human engineer to inspect our most critical systems. Someone with no knowledge of our technology. Someone who will ask the simple questions that we forget to ask. That is wise. It is humbling. But perhaps humility is what we needed all along." She left the chamber, her footsteps fading into silence. Talvis stood alone with the harmonizer, holding the tiny lock washer in his palm. Somewhere out in the galaxy, a battered old trading ship was flying toward its next adventure. Its crew had no idea that they had just changed the course of an entire civilization. They were probably arguing about what to have for dinner. Talva smiled. It was not a common expression for his species, but he had learned it from watching the humans. He walked to the base of the harmonizer and knelt down. He removed the panel that Yuna had opened. He found the connector that she had fixed with her piece of wire, and he installed the lock washer properly, just as she had suggested. When he was finished, he put the panel back and stood up. The harmonizer hummed. The station was safe. The sector would have power for another 1,000 years. And it had all started because a young human woman heard a clicking sound and asked a simple question. "What's that sound?" Sometimes that was all it took. Not centuries of study, not complicated equations, not elegant theories. Just someone willing to listen. Someone willing to ask the obvious question. Someone who wasn't afraid to check the simple things. Talvis made a promise to himself. He would never forget that lesson. He would teach it to every young engineer who came to study under him. He would spread it throughout the collective until it became part of their culture. The Neth would still be patient. They would still think carefully. They would still plan for the long term. But they would also remember to listen for the clicking dot, and if they ever heard it, they would know what to do. Check the obvious. Tighten the loose thing. Ask the simple question, because sometimes the universe's greatest problems don't require the universe's greatest minds. Sometimes they just need someone who isn't afraid to look stupid. And in that, Talvis thought, humans were braver than anyone.